Scipio Africanus was the man who changed the course of Rome's history when it was about to fall. Imagine the fear that gripped the city. Hannibal, the Carthaginian general, had invaded Italy and defeated the Romans in battle after battle. No one knew what to do. Rome was on the brink of destruction, the people were trembling, and the empire was on the verge of collapse. And then, in the midst of this chaos, Scipio Africanus appeared, a young commander with unwavering courage and a brilliant strategy. It was as if a ray of hope had illuminated the darkness. While many looked to Hannibal and saw only a winner, Scipio saw an opportunity to turn the tide. He knew that this battle would not only be on the battlefield, but a mental, psychological, and nerve-tight struggle. Alongside his army, Scipio Africanus not only faced Hannibal, but also defied all expectations. The fate of Rome was in his hands. If he lost, the entire empire could be destroyed, but if he won, he would become one of the greatest heroes in history. It's incredible to think that a single person could change the course of an entire civilization, isn't it? Stay tuned, because what Scipio did was unheard of, and he not only defeated the man who nearly destroyed Rome, but he also changed the fate of an entire civilization. And that, my friend, is a story you can't miss. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel, take advantage now to be part of our community. Every interaction you make makes this space more special. Publius Cornelius Scipio, better known as Scipio Africanus, came into the world in 236 BC, into one of the most traditional and influential families of the Roman Republic. He was born during a period of great political and military turmoil, and from an early age, his life was shaped by the great destiny that awaited him. The Cornelian family, one of the most prestigious in Rome, had already produced numerous commanders and consuls, and Scipio, as the heir to this line, was educated with the utmost rigor in the arts of war and politics. His father, Publius Cornelius Scipio, was a renowned general, and from childhood Scipio absorbed the lessons of command, hearing stories of campaigns and sieges, of glorious victories and bitter defeats. For him, Rome was not just a place where he lived, but a supreme ideal that must be protected and exalted at any cost. At the time of his birth, Rome was not yet the hegemonic power that it would become in the future. The city-state expanded its domains with difficulty and faced monumental challenges. Its greatest rival, Carthage, was a naval and mercantile power that was consolidating itself as a constant threat. Tensions between the two powers grew exponentially, culminating in the outbreak of the Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BC, a conflict that would define the future of the Mediterranean. The young Scipio grew up in this atmosphere of uncertainty and imminent danger, hearing stories of the rise of Hannibal Barca, the brilliant Carthaginian general who would become his greatest adversary. While other children played in the streets of Rome, Scipio absorbed lessons in strategy, tactics, and leadership, preparing himself for the moment when his destiny would intertwine with that of his city. His first real experience of war came early. In 218 BC, Scipio accompanied his father to the Battle of the Trebia, where the Roman forces faced Hannibal's army in one of the first clashes of the conflict. The scene was bleak. The Roman legions were massacred by the tactical genius of the Carthaginian general. Scipio, still young and inexperienced, saw the horror of war in its rawest form. Men fell all around him. The sound of clashing steel and the screams of the wounded formed a chaotic symphony of death and destruction. Many fled, others perished on the battlefield, but Scipio survived. That moment was etched in his mind. He realized that Hannibal was no ordinary enemy and that Rome would need more than brute force to defeat him. However, Scipio was not just a brash warrior. His intelligence and cunning soon became apparent. Unlike many generals of his time who rigidly followed Roman military traditions, Scipio understood the importance of strategic flexibility. While others confined themselves to physical training, he immersed himself in the writings of ancient Greek and Eastern strategists, seeking to understand not only how to win battles, but how to secure lasting victories. His analytical eye and ability to anticipate enemy moves set him apart from the rest. War, for him, was a game of chess, where each piece had to be moved at the right time to ensure ultimate victory. As he grew older, his reputation grew. Little by little, Scipio became more than a promising young nobleman. He emerged as an emerging leader, admired for his courage and above all for his innovative strategic vision. He understood that defeating Hannibal would require more than just facing him directly on Italian soil. While the veterans of the Senate insisted on frontal battles, Scipio began to develop a different approach. For him, the key to victory was to take the war to the enemy's heart, weakening his power base and gradually isolating him. His big break came years later, when, despite his young age, he managed to convince the Senate that his strategy was the best solution for Rome. The challenge was not only military, but also political. Imagine a young man facing a Senate full of powerful men, where every word could decide the fate of the Republic. Scipio knew that he had to not only demonstrate courage, but also articulate his ideas with precision and persuasion. And so he did. In the face of skeptical senators, he argued with eloquence and conviction that Rome could no longer passively respond to Hannibal's attacks. The war had to be brought to Carthage. Rome needed to dare. This boldness, combined with his innovative vision, was what began to chart his path to immortality. Scipio Africanus was not just a general, but a visionary who understood that war is not won only on the battlefield, but also in the spirit of the soldiers and the confidence of the people. He would become the great architect of the Carthaginian defeat, leading his troops into Africa and facing Hannibal at the final Battle of Zama in 202 BC, where he cemented his position as one of the greatest commanders in Roman history. Have you ever imagined what it would be like to live in a Rome on the brink of collapse, with the Carthaginian threat lurking? What would it have been like to witness these events up close, to see firsthand the rise of one of the greatest strategists of antiquity? Leave a comment and share your impressions of this fascinating period. In the next chapter, we will see how Scipio transformed his vision into action, defying all expectations and proving that sometimes a general's most powerful weapon is not his sword, but his mind. It was 210 BC, and the young Roman Republic was on the verge of a turning point. As Rome fought desperately against the mighty Carthage, a name emerged that would mark the military history of the empire: Scipio Africanus. At the age of 26, without much time to rest after the battles that had characterized his youth, Scipio was entrusted with a mission that, at first, seemed almost impossible: to defeat Carthage on the Iberian Peninsula. The Iberian Peninsula was not only a distant territory, but a crucial strategic point for Rome's operations in the war against the Carthaginians. Taking control of it meant cutting off a major supply and support line for the army of Hannibal, the Carthaginian commander who had inflicted numerous defeats on Rome, including the devastating Battle of Cannae. Picture yourself for a moment in Rome, in the midst of the battle for survival. The city was filled with anxiety and uncertainty. The Roman army was being pressured by external and internal forces. It was against this backdrop that Scipio, a young man with a clear vision of his abilities, was tasked with leading the campaign in the Iberian Peninsula. Upon arrival, Scipio realized that his mission would not be an easy one. He needed not only to conquer the region, but also to prevent the Carthaginians from regrouping and reorganizing their forces. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Scipio knew that war was not just a matter of brute military force. Winning took more than a large army. It took strategy, intelligence, and above all, courage to face seemingly insurmountable odds. Scipio began his campaign with a series of bold and rapid moves, capturing cities and breaking down Carthaginian resistance with surgical precision. One of his most notable victories was the capture of New Carthage in 209 BC, an important trading post for the Carthaginian Empire in the region. The city, rich and full of resources, was one of Carthage's greatest strongholds in the Iberian Peninsula, and its fall was a major blow to the Carthaginians. But how did Scipio achieve such a significant victory, especially given his limited resources? He was unbeatable at adapting his tactics on the battlefield. Realizing that mobility and surprise were key, Scipio used his forces more efficiently, using his territory and the speed of his troops to defeat the enemy in adverse conditions. Furthermore, he knew that to secure victory, it was not enough to conquer territory. He had to break the enemy's morale, something he did brilliantly with the siege and capture of New Carthage. This victory had a huge impact on Roman morale. For those who were already tired of defeats, seeing a young and audacious leader like Scipio defeat Carthage in hostile territory was something to be invigorated by. News of his victory quickly spread throughout Rome, and the words Scipio Africanus began to echo on every street corner of the city. The young commander was beginning to achieve something more important than military victories. He was winning the heart of Rome. Now imagine yourself in the shoes of an ordinary Roman, listening to the stories of a young general who was able to defy the odds and bring victories to a city that, until then, seemed on the verge of succumbing to the pressure of Carthage. What would have happened if Scipio had not had the courage to take on this challenging mission? He could have prevented a crucial defeat for Rome, altering the city's destiny forever. But the victory at New Carthage was only the beginning of Scipio's journey. His skill at forging alliances with local tribes and exploiting Carthage's political weakness began to translate into a series of victories. He knew that to truly weaken Carthaginian power, he needed to act quickly, before Hannibal and his forces could regroup. Now imagine what it would have been like to see Scipio, a young man of 26, facing the greatest challenges of his life and doing it all with a strategic vision that few could comprehend at the time. He was not only fighting against Carthage, but also against the doubts of many of his superiors who questioned his capabilities. But Scipio was undeterred. He kept going, facing each obstacle with a courage that few could match. The question remains, how could a simple victory at New Carthage change the course of war and history? The answer lies in his unwavering leadership, which would soon lead Scipio to even greater challenges. And it is at this point in history that the next chapters of his life will surprise us even more. Now I want to know, what do you think makes Scipio so unique as a leader? Can you imagine the pressure of being so young and having to lead such a risky mission? Leave your comment below. This will help us continue exploring Scipio's journey together, and I want to hear your opinion before we move on to the next steps in this incredible story. The year 204 BC was a historic milestone not only for Rome, but for the entire history of the Mediterranean. The name of Scipio Africanus was already reverberating throughout the Roman Republic, but there was still one feat that would solidify him once and for all as the great leader he was destined to be. Scipio's plan: to take the war straight to the heart of Carthage, attack his own homeland, and force Hannibal to leave the Italian fields to defend his city. But what motivated Scipio to take such a bold step? The answer lies in the type of leader he was. Scipio was not only fighting to win, but to break the power of Carthage definitively. He knew that the victory at New Carthage and his other victories in the Iberian Peninsula had been important, but the direct confrontation with Carthage was the true test of his ambition and skill. Facing the strength of Carthage on its own territory was not just a military strategy, it was a move of psychological dominance, a masterstroke aimed at destroying the confidence of the Carthaginians. Imagine yourself in the shoes of a Roman commander in 204 BC. By that point, Rome had already been fighting the Carthaginians for more than 15 years. What many did not know was that the city of Carthage was not as strong as it seemed. By attacking North Africa, Scipio was not only attacking Carthage's military forces, but also its economic and strategic heart. He knew that weakening Carthage to that extent could force Hannibal, who was in Roman territory, to return to defend his home city. And that is exactly what happened. Scipio began his campaign with a series of swift and decisive moves, attacking strategic points along the African coast. He used surprise and mobility tactics to prevent the Carthaginians from having time to react. He raided Carthaginian colonies and attacked their allies, creating a desperate situation for Carthage. Scipio was creating a situation where the city of Carthage would be left without vital resources and without allies. This forced the Carthaginian commander Hannibal Barca to abandon his campaigns in Rome and return to his homeland. The great Carthaginian leader was being lured into a strategic trap that would put Rome in an advantageous position. Now imagine yourself in Hannibal's shoes, a seasoned commander who had faced Rome in several decisive battles, being forced to abandon what seemed like a certain victory in order to defend his home city. For him, it was a bitter but necessary move. Carthage was being squeezed from all sides, and the prospect of losing control of its empire was imminent. This move by Scipio not only affected the military war, but also had a profound psychological effect. He had managed to remove Hannibal from the terrain where he was strongest, Italy. Scipio's ability to destabilize his enemy without directly fighting him was an impressive strategic move that changed the balance of the war. This campaign in Africa was not only a military victory, but a true political and psychological masterstroke. Scipio knew that to bring down Carthage, he could rely not only on the strength of his legions, but also on the ability to dismantle the system of alliances that sustained his enemy's power. He cut supply lines, undermined Carthaginian morale, and in doing so set the stage for the final showdown that would define Rome's supremacy over the Mediterranean. When Hannibal was finally forced to return home, he knew that his position was severely weakened. He no longer had the resources he needed, and the city of Carthage was vulnerable. The ensuing battle at Zama would be not just a physical struggle, but a war of psychological and strategic endurance between two giants. As spectators of this narrative, we could sense the growing tension, the inevitability that the final showdown was approaching. Rome had taken a risky step, but now the balance was about to tip in its favor. What would Scipio do next? How would he prepare his troops for the greatest test of their lives? Before we move on to the next chapter of this epic journey, I want to hear from you. What was the most surprising part of Scipio's strategy? Was it how well he knew how to anticipate his enemy's moves, or the fact that he attacked directly at the heart of Carthage? Leave your opinion in the comments and let's discuss the details of this psychological warfare together. Your view of the events is essential to understanding the impact of this story. This approach makes the viewer more intensely involved with the content, and each ending of a section creates a natural bridge to the next development, keeping curiosity and anticipation high. The year 202 BC arrived, and with it, what many would consider the last act of a brutal and decisive war. Rome and Carthage were at stake. The Battle of Zama was not just a fight for supremacy in the Mediterranean, but a fight for the future of the Roman Empire and the world that at the time depended on its military might. Hannibal, the Carthaginian commander, had been a nightmare for Rome. His tactics, which made him a military icon, were unbeatable on Italian soil. Over the course of more than 15 years, he had faced the Romans in numerous battles, achieving overwhelming victories, Who could have predicted that a young Roman commander, just 26 years old, would dare to challenge the master of war that was Hannibal? Yet Scipio Africanus was able to do just that. But the final confrontation would not be a simple fight between two generals. The Battle of Zama was steeped in history and tension. Scipio's army was composed of well-trained and disciplined forces, but Hannibal had one crucial advantage: his famous cavalry. The Carthaginian cavalry, especially its Numidian cavalry, was one of the most respected in the ancient world. It was their strength, but also their weakness. Scipio knew this. Not only would he confront Hannibal with the knowledge and strategy he had acquired during his journey in the Iberian Peninsula and North Africa, but he also knew that the key to defeating Hannibal was not to face him directly at his strong point, but rather to neutralize his greatest strengths. Scipio's greatest asset, the Numidian cavalry of Massinissa, a staunch ally of Rome. And here comes one of the crucial moments of the battle: adaptation. Scipio did not confront Hannibal in a conventional way. He knew that Hannibal had an unparalleled ability to use cavalry to destabilize and disorganize enemy armies. The Roman commander then, with his strategic intelligence, formed a battle line that deflected the Carthaginian cavalry attack. By deploying his troops in a more flexible format, Scipio was able to neutralize the devastating impact that cavalry could have on the battlefield. But of course, the battle would not be easy. Hannibal would not be defeated by a simple change of strategy. He had faced the Roman legions throughout the war, and he knew exactly how to play on his enemy's fears and weaknesses. For him, a defeat at Zama would mean the end of Carthage, and he would fight with all his might to avoid that fate. In the early stages of the battle, Hannibal launched his attacks with the intensity and ferocity that made him feared throughout the empire. His troops were well positioned, and the imposing characteristics of the Carthaginian cavalry stood out on the battlefield. The confrontation began brutally, with heavy hand-to-hand combat between the Roman legions and the Carthaginian forces. However, Scipio's greatest asset lay in his ability to remain calm under pressure. He knew that the battle would not be won by brute force, but by cunning and patience. When the fight seemed to be at a standstill, Scipio ordered his Numidian cavalry to advance. This move not only disrupted the Carthaginian lines, but also gave Rome the crucial advantage. The intervention of the Numidian cavalry distorted Hannibal's expectations, creating an opening that allowed Scipio to focus on what really mattered, the front line. But the greatest moment of the battle was yet to come. Amidst the chaos, Scipio saw an opportunity. He kept his cool, watched for gaps, and took advantage of the confusion caused by the disorganized retreat of the Carthaginian forces. It was this precise moment, this decisive and calculated action, that sealed the Roman victory. The master of war that Hannibal had been was finally defeated by a young commander whose cunning and courage knew no bounds. Hannibal's defeat at Zama was not just a military victory for Rome, it was a symbolic milestone that altered the course of history. After years of defeat and stagnation, Rome had finally rid itself of its greatest threat. Rome's power in the Mediterranean was now unquestionable. Scipio Africanus had not only won the war, but had also destroyed the morale of an opposing empire and shown the world that Rome could be as innovative as any other rising empire. Now imagine the scene of a Roman soldier returning to Rome after this victory. The city must have been buzzing with the euphoria of triumph, the streets packed with citizens celebrating not only the victory, but Scipio's legacy. He was not only a military hero, but a symbol of perseverance, leadership, and strategic intelligence. The Romans were certain that their city would not only survive, but thrive invincibly in the Mediterranean. And the big question that remains is, what happens to Scipio now? He had conquered the world, destroyed Carthage, and returned a hero. But the real fight for him was only just beginning. How would he deal with fame, politics, and the internal challenges of Rome after this great feat? As a man who had surpassed his own limits on the battlefield, how would he deal with the challenges that awaited him within the walls of Rome? You, who are watching and following Scipio's journey, must be wondering, what will be the next step for a hero who, after reaching the pinnacle, faces new trials at home? Will his fame consume him, or will he be able to stand his ground? Leave your opinions in the comments, share your vision of what comes next, because every detail matters to understand the next chapter of this epic story. After Rome's crushing victory over Carthage at Zama, the question that hung in the air was clear: what would happen to the city of Carthage? One thing was certain: Rome was not willing to let Carthage rise again. The immense Roman power, which had defeated one of the greatest military commanders in history, would now turn against the city of Carthage itself. And it was at this moment that the fate of a civilization was sealed once and for all. The inevitability of destruction was in the air. When the Romans looked at Carthage, they did not just see a city that had defied Rome in two fierce wars. They saw a threat that, despite its defeat, still stood as a symbol of resistance. Carthage, despite all its devastation in the Second Punic War, was not completely destroyed. It still had wealth, trade alliances, and a population willing to rebuild. It was a city that for Rome should no longer exist. But how would Rome deal with what was left of Carthage? What would happen to those who still dared to challenge the Roman rise to supreme power in the Mediterranean? The answer would be given in a brutal and definitive way. The decision to destroy Carthage was taken in 149 BC, when, in an act of revenge and to ensure that the city would not rise again, Rome started the Third Punic War, a conflict that would be the end of Carthage and one of the darkest pages in ancient history. What happened in the following years was a desperate struggle for survival on the part of the Carthaginians. But Rome had already decided that the total destruction of Carthage was the only solution. For the Roman leader Cato the Elder, the phrase "Carthago delenda est," Carthage must be destroyed, became the mantra that guided Rome's military decisions. He believed that the only way to ensure Rome's security was to eliminate the Carthaginian threat once and for all. It was the mentality of a Rome that did not want to leave room for failure. Meanwhile, inside Carthage, the Carthaginian people tried to resist as best they could. The city was under siege. Although the Romans were an unmatched military force, the Carthaginian resistance was fierce. They prepared for a battle that would not be easy. To protect the city and its riches, the Carthaginians used everything they had at their disposal. The city's once imposing walls were now about to be tested by an empire determined to destroy what remained of its pride. The city was divided between two worlds. On one side, there were the Carthaginians, who still believed in their ability to fight, to resist. On the other hand, there were the Romans, determined to leave no stone unturned. And so it was that Carthage, Rome's great rival, was condemned to destruction. The siege of Carthage began with immense force. The Romans surrounded the city by land and sea. The Roman blockade was relentless, cutting off the city's supply of food and resources. The Carthaginian people, already in a desperate situation, had to resort to hunger and scarcity to survive. But what was most shocking during that siege was human resilience. The Carthaginian people did not give in. They resisted until the last possible moment, using all the resources at their disposal to keep the city standing. However, the situation could not last forever. The pressure was mounting, and the Roman forces were simply unstoppable. When the Romans finally invaded Carthage, the city was thrown into absolute chaos. Carthaginian resistance quickly faded, but the cruelest part was yet to come. What Rome would do to Carthage was not just a military victory, it was a historical revenge. The destruction of Carthage was not limited to a simple invasion. Rome did not just want to win, she wanted to erase Carthage from history. The Romans were not content with defeating the city. They burned Carthage, destroying the walls, the houses, the temples, and leading the Carthaginian population to extermination or slavery. For 3 days, Rome devoured the city, while flames engulfed what was left of Carthage. And as a final act of destruction, the Romans salted the ground, ensuring that nothing else could grow in what had once been mighty Carthage. Carthage ceased to exist so completely that for a long time there was no trace of its grandeur. What was left of their civilization were only ruins and legends. The destruction of Carthage represented Rome's total victory over one of its greatest rivals. However, it was also the end of a cycle. Carthage, with its culture, history, and trade, disappeared from the map. Rome had taken its revenge, but it had also lost the opportunity to learn from a civilization that had been, in many ways, its equal. It was a victory, but also a blow to history itself. The destruction of Carthage is a lesson in the relentless nature of war, the hunger for power, and the inability to see beyond destruction. Rome, with all its power, had not known how to appreciate what it was losing. And, as in many cases in history, true victory lies not just in destroying the enemy, but in understanding the complexity of the battle. It's time to reflect on the impact of this victory. Rome conquered everything it wanted, but did you truly understand the cost of its revenge? Leave your comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts on the future of Rome and the implications of such a radical decision.